A frequent question I get on Instagram is, how do I color grade my images using Photoshop? In this video, I'm going to show you 3 easy techniques that you can use to improve your color grading. Let's get started and let's cover todo el pedo. In the first example, I'm going to show you how to have more control in where you put color, specifically in the shadows, midtones, and highlights. Now, before you also color grade, you also want to do your skin retouching first, preferably. So whether that's dodge and burn and frequency separation, and if you have no idea what those are, I have some videos on that on my YouTube channel already. So for this example, I'm going to use color balance. Now you can also use gradient map selective color. We're going to get into those in a little bit. But on this example, I want to show you how sometimes some of these adjustment layers aren't as good right out of the gate as you would think. So let's say that I wanted to color tone my shadows. And if I go here to tone, and if I change it from midtones and I go to shadows, look at the problem that's going to happen. Looking at this photo, I look at the dress and I see the magentas, I see the pinks, and I want to maybe add magentas and a little bit of blues into my shadows. Now you would think that color balance would do a great job because I told it, let's tone the shadows. So I'm going to increase my shadows. I'm going to increase my magentas, and let's look what happens. I'm going to zoom in here. And what color balance has done is that it's added some of this color into my highlights and my midtones. And that's very frustrating because I specifically told it shadows and it's not doing exactly what I want. So what I need to do is I need to refine it more myself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and zoom out here. I'm going to leave this for now. I'm going to just hide it because I'm going to come back to it and refer to it in a moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another one, and I'm going to go into my shadows. And I know I want more control, and I'm going to go for the magentas because of this outfit, and I want magentas in my shadow, so I'm going to go about -12. And then on the blues, we're just going to add +2. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we know that it's going to add it a little bit into my midtones and into my highlights. And so what we're going to use is we're going to use something called blend if, and we're going to have a lot more control as to exactly where we want this. So I'm going to double click. What you need to do for the blend if is just go in here into the layers panel, and this little blank area, we're going to double click, and it's going to open up the layer style properties. Now there's going to be 2 options here under blend if. We have this layer and underlying layer. So what we want to do is we want to blend it so that everything underneath kind of blends evenly. And down here we have 0 to 255. And what I can do is basically what it's saying is I have my blacks, my shadows, my midtones, my highlights, and my whites. And I can control where this specific color that I added, where does it not show up? So we know that we don't want it in our highlights. I'm going to drag this to the left, and you're slowly going to start seeing that color kind of spill away from the whites, the highlights, and the midtones. And I can decide exactly where I want this to show up. So I want to say maybe around 72 looks fine. And then of course you see kind of like this little edge here where it's not blending well. So one of the things that you have to make sure you do is you're going to hold Alt on the keyboard if you're on a Windows. And there's a little triangle here. I'm going to call it a triangle. And I'm going to hold Alt, and I'm going to break this apart so that it'll blend into the shadows. And I'm going to undo that because I accidentally messed that up. So I'm going to hold Alt, and then I'm going to blend this off. Okay. So if I hit this check mark, the preview, this is the before, and then this is the after, where now that little magenta color is being a lot more specific into the specific shadows that I want. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Now, even though it is in the shadows, I am going to erase it from the hair because the hair is a little, it's in the blacks and the shadows, of course. So I'm going to get the black brush. I'm going to go into the layer mask, and I'm going to do this real quick. I'm just going to brush with black to get rid of it. All right. So let's take a look at what it looks like without the blend if. So I'm going to add the same settings. So I'm going to go into shadows so we can compare. I'm going to go here to -12. And I had 2. And this is what it looks like. If I were to just use color balance with no blend if, this is what it would look like. And then with the blend if, you'll see that it blends a lot better. So I just showed you this example on what we can do with the shadows. Now I can do this with the highlights. We can do the complete opposite now. So let's say that I wanted to add a curves layer. Maybe I wanted a little bit of brightness on her face. And if I come in here to my greens and I wanted just a little bit of green to be in these highlights back here in this sky and a little bit on the face, because her face maybe is a little bit too red. Maybe I want to tone it down. So I'm going to add a little bit of green into my highlights right about here. And then the same thing. What if I want just a little bit more control on the specific highlights that I want? So we're going to do the same technique. We're going to double click. We're going to go to blend if, and we're going to do the opposite now. I'm going to take it away from the shadows and the midtones, and I'm going to go right about here. I'm going to hold Alt, and we're going to blend that off. And we're going to hit OK. And then now let's take a look at the before and then the after. Look at the sky, these highlights, and look at the face. And this is all because, once again, I've told it with blend if, don't add that curves with the greens and the brightness values. Don't increase it in the shadows, the midtones, and we want to blend it off right about in the middle. And keep in mind, as I'm doing this, I still have the flexibility of still using fill and opacity if I still need to make further adjustments. So on this one, let's say maybe it's a little too strong. Well, I can just select this layer and I can come into fill and I can just kind of tone it down. So I have a lot of flexibility with this blend if. Now, also, once I set my blend if, I can always come back into color balance and I can come back into my shadows and I can add more magentas if I want. I can add more blues, and it's only going to add it into the specific range that I assigned it to. Now, of course, that's a little bit extreme. It looks terrible, but I hope you guys are getting the general idea. Now let's take a look at another example. Let's take a look at this photo here, and I'm going to go here to the adjustment layer icon, and I'm going to this time go into the gradient map. And here's kind of a bonus. You can also use gradient maps for color grading. I'm going to change it to SOFTLIGHT. And what I want to do is I want to maybe add like an overall color grade to the image. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go into my pinks, and you have all these gradients. If you're in Photoshop 2020, it'll look like this. It'll look a little different if you have an older version. So I'm going to go into this pinks right here. Okay. So this is kind of like the overall color grade that I like. And let's say, for example, I bring down my fill to maybe about, let's go about 30. All right. And let's say that we like that. But there's one problem. You know, I love the way that the sky looked. And this color grade kind of ruined that. Now, there's a couple of things I can do, of course. I could probably just get the eraser on the mask and I can just erase it myself. No biggie. But what if I just want to have it just a little bit more controlled than the eraser? Because I'll admit, sometimes I screw up with the eraser, right? So who doesn't mess up with the eraser? So I want to have more control. We're going to use blend if. And this time, though, with blend if, is we know that we don't want it in the sky, which is blue. So if we were to try, let's say, for example, we know that it's in the highlighted areas, right? And I drag this down, and we did the technique we just did right now. Well, it's going to remove it from the highlights, but it's also going to remove it from her face and from the skin tone, which we kind of wanted that color grade there. We just don't want it in the blue. So I'm going to reset that. And I'm going to go to blend if, and I'm going to go to blues now. So you still have these channels, red, greens, and blue. So I know I don't want it in the blues. And now I can use blend if specifically on the blues channel. So when I drag this down, what you're going to see is it's going to start to remove it only in the blues. So once I do that, I'm going to blend it off again. I'm going to hold Alt and I'm going to break that apart. And then I'm going to hit OK. And now let's take a look at this. This is the before and then the after. So now that color grade, that gradient that I added is going everywhere in this specific image, but not into the blues, which is cool. Now, let's say that I change my mind. I still have the flexibility of coming back into my properties and saying, you know what, I don't like that anymore. I actually maybe want to add orange, or I want to add this gradient map, or I want to come into my greens and I want to add these examples here. It's only going to add it everywhere except the blue. So it's really cool that I still have that flexibility to experiment and kind of play around with it. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, I can still come in here into my fill and I can increase it if I want more of that effect or I want less of that effect. The next technique that I want to show you is select subject. And this is going to help you color grade specifically the background and not manipulate any of the colors on your subject. Now, you know on this channel that I mainly do portrait photographs, so this one's going to pertain more to portrait photography. So if I come over here and I go to the adjustment layers and I add the selective color, and I go to blacks, and I want to color grade maybe just the background, you'll notice that it does it to the overall image. Now, of course, I can get the brush tool, I can get the black brush, and then I can erase it if I wanted to. Like, we can do that, but that's going to take some time, and I found a different way to do it. So I'm going to just add another one, selective color, and I'm going to go to select and then subject. And then Photoshop's going to try to do its best job to make a selection of the background. And if it does mess up, it's okay. You just get the quick selection tool. You just come in here and you just refine it just a little bit. But you don't have to be super perfect, because what we're going to do is we're going to feather it in a moment. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. So let me just fix this one little part. But most of the time, it's going to do a good job. And you shouldn't have to do too much of the selection. So I'm going to leave it like that just for now. It did select the barrel, which I'm totally fine with. Actually, it's totally cool because that's what's in focus. That's kind of like has a lot of contrast. I'm going to leave it like that. But if I were to push Q on the keyboard, you'll notice that the quick selection tool doesn't do a good job with the edges. And like my students used to say in class, it looks kind of crusty. It doesn't look good at all. So I want to soften it up just so it can be a little bit more forgiving as we color grade the background. We don't want these sharp edges because it's not going to blend. So I'm going to push Q again to get that off. And what I got to do is I got to make sure I have like a lasso tool or some type of selection tool selected. And what I want to do is I want to right click on here and I want to feather. Now you can do feather anywhere from 25 to 70. It's really going to be dependent on an image to image basis. So I'm going to put 25 pixels. And remember how that edge was all crusty and it was all sharp, right? So I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to push Q again. And you'll notice now, look at the edges. It's a little bit more forgiving now. And it should blend a little bit easier. Now, I'm not going to color grade the background too much to the point where it's going to be real obvious. I'm just going to do some kind of minor adjustments. So now that I've done that, we got to make sure that we know that we don't want to color grade the area that we just have selected. So I got to make sure we're on the layer mask. And then I'm going to go to edit and then fill. And if you know how to use the layer mask, you know that putting in black on the layer mask means it's going to hide that effect, the adjustments that we're going to use with selective color. So contents, we just got to make sure we're on black, hit OK. And now we have that little layer mask. So I'm going to press Control D to deselect that. And now when I have my selective color, I can come in now into my blacks. And if I wanted to, now I can color grade the background without having anything change on the subject. Okay, so now I'm actually going to go ahead and color grade, and I'm going to show you the actual settings that I used on this image. And what I did is I went into my neutrals, and I didn't make these kind of like drastic changes. I wanted to just make it very, very subtle. So I came into the cyans, I added 3 and then 1 here. And then I went into my blacks, and then I went 1, 2, and then -1. And if you want to know how to use selective color, I have a video dedicated to that. So if I just hit this eyeball, you'll see that it kind of stripped away some of the color. And by doing that, what it's doing is that it's kind of desaturating the background. So she stands out. The color still remains on the subject, but the background kind of gets desaturated. So our eyes are going to go straight to the subject, right? So I'm going to add another one. This time I'm going to add curves. Now keep in mind this technique, you can use it. Like, let's say that you're a color balance person. You can do color balance, your levels, curves. There's so many different ways you can do the select subject with any kind of method that you like. Color lookup, channel mixture, whatever you want. So the next one I'm going to do is curves. Okay. Now, obviously I want to start color grading or doing changes to my curves, but you'll notice it does it to the overall image again. And don't think that you have to come back into select and then subject and do it all over again. I'm just going to copy this mask because I already have it saved. I'm just going to hold Alt on the keyboard, click, and then drag it up to this other one. It's going to say, do you want to replace it? Absolutely. And now I can now color grade the background using my curves. So on this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the channels. And for the longest time, by the way, I've been wanting to do a curves color grading video. So let me know in the comments. And now's a good time to like the video. Let me know in the comments if you guys want to see me do a dedicated curves color grading tutorial. And then also don't forget to subscribe. So on the reds, I'm lifting up the output to 13. I'm going to go into my greens And I'm going to go the input, I'm going to go about 12. And then on the blues, I'm going to go about 26. Let me just type it in because I'll never get it. And then output 1. And you'll notice that we get these kind of orange brown tones. Now, obviously it's a little bit overkill right now. So I'm just going to go into my fill and I'm going to bring that down to about 33. And of course I can't get it, right? So let's just type it in. There we go. I'm going to hold Shift, Control G to group all that. So let's take a look. The before and then the after. Just a very subtle, calmao color grade on the background. We didn't get too cute. You don't want to push it too much because then it's not going to blend really well. So before and then the after. So for the last example, I'm going to use channels and some luminosity masks to really control where I want to color grade in the highlights and in the shadows. By the way, this image was provided by Addy. I didn't take this photograph. And on this image, I forgot to mention, was also submitted by a photographer that did my I Edit Your Photos live series. So I'm going to put their Instagram handles up here on the screen. So on here, what I want to do is I want to, instead of using the blend if on this example, if I come in here into my channels, if I have my layers panel, here I can click, and what it's going to show me is the lightness values that I can select if I choose. So I can make a mask based off of the red channels, the greens, and the blues. So let's say, for example, I want to color grade the highlights a specific tone. So I'm going to click and figure out which one I think selects the skin the best, which I think on this example is green. Yours might be a little bit different. It's going to depend on an image-to-image basis. So what I want to do is I want to make a selection of the luminosity values here. So I'm going to hold Control and I'm going to click right on this little thumbnail. So you'll see that the little square appears. I'm going to click that. And now I have this selection. So I'm going to turn back the RGB back on. I'm going to come back into my layers. And now I'm going to come back into this adjustment layer icon. And you can use any adjustment layer, but on this example, I'm going to use solid color. And what I want to do is I want to add maybe some teals into my highlights. So I'm just going to kind of choose, let's go maybe about like right here. We're going to hit OK. And you'll notice that I have this little mask already made for me because I made that selection of the blues. And when I made that adjustment layer, it automatically added this for me. So what's happening is that these blues are being added only into the areas that are in white and not the areas that are in black. All right. Now, right now it still looks terrible because we still need to do some other things. Let's go into the soft light. Let's get it to blend a little bit better. Okay. And what we also want to do is we also want to control where the lightness values are. So I'm going to hold Alt on the keyboard and I'm going to hover over this thumbnail. If I hold Alt, let's say, for example, I want to control the darkness, midtones, and the shadows that I don't want to see. Like I want to refine it just a little bit more. So I'm going to push Control L. And what happens is I bring the levels dialog box here. And if I bring these midtones in and these blacks, now what I'm really doing is I'm really controlling where these blue tones are going to be added. So the more I bring it in, now the blue tones will only show up obviously in the white area. So depending on your image, you'll decide where you want that. So on this one, I think I'm going to be fine here. I'm going to hold Alt so I can get out of this layer mask preview. And then I'm also going to lower the opacity because it's a little bit too much. Let's go about 60. So if I click, this is the before where it was a little bit red and I wanted to add teals into my highlights. Now I'm going to add the color that I did in the example. So I'm going to go CDB. There we go. That's the exact teal that I got. And then I had maybe 70. So let me type it in because I can never get that, of course, right? So we go there. And then now let's say that I want to target specifically the shadows. So now if I want to get the shadows, let's go into the channels. I'm going to grab the blues in this example. I'm going to hold Control and I'm going to click. Now, right now, this preview, it's showing me the highlighted areas that we want to color grade the opposite. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go select and then inverse because we want the shadows. And now I'm going to come in here. I'm going to go solid color. I'm going to go into like my purples, and I have my color wheel here, so we can kind of just take a look at it. I can even click right here. So let's say I want to add some of those purples in there. We'll change the blend mode to soft light. And we can adjust the fill to maybe about 30. And I can click the before and then the after. And I can do the same thing. If I hold Alt, I click inside this little mask, push Control L, and now I can refine how much of the color grade do I want to see in my shadows. Because if I had it back to normal, you'll see that the purples were actually going into the face, which I don't want. So I want to bring these midtones in so it could stay away from the face. So the blacks, none of that purple is going in the black. And then if I hit OK, I'm going to hold Alt and then click here. Boom. So this is the before and then the after. And what I like about this, the reason why I like to use the solid color is that if I decide to change my mind on the color, I can click here. Because you might look at this and be like, Eli, that looks like trash. Like my friend LJ would say. I wonder if he's watching the video. You know, he watches a lot of my videos. Comment, LJ, if you're watching, comment trash. But let's say you look at this, you're like, Eli, that's trash. You know, that's totally fine. You know, like my colors, I'm not going to please everybody. But what's cool about this is that you might be like, Eli, that is silly. Well, you can come in here and you can always just adjust it on the fly here and say, you know what, I want it to be more yellows into my highlights and hit OK. Or you know what, I don't want purples after all. I think that looks terrible. Well, you can come in here and go and grab any color that you want and you can control it that way. And of course, you still have that flexibility of adjusting the fill on either of these layers. And this is something, by the way, guys, you would probably do at the very end. This is kind of like your final color grading, once again, after your skin retouching and all that stuff. So I'm going to go back to my history. I'm going to undo those. I'm going to push Control G here. And let's just kind of take a look at the overall before and after. So my style is typically, I usually go for the warm tones. But doing this technique kind of just allows me to kind of experiment and try different kind of color grades. So decide how maybe you can apply this. And once again, you don't have to use the solid color. You can definitely do the same technique with selective color. You can do it with color balance, gradient maps, whatever floats your boat. And that concludes the video. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram because that's where I post all of my behind the scenes content. And I'll see you guys on the next one.